super excited today to be speaking with one of the biggest talents in video game voice acting. Back in the 90s, my guest started off as the voice of Garrett in the classic Thief series, but his best known work today is with Bethesda. You can hear him as Corvo in Dishonored 2 and as a whole host of NPCs in Skyrim, but today we're mainly here to talk about the Fallout series, where he plays no less than two fan favourites, both CODSWORTH and Nick Valentine. Mr. Stephen Russell, how are you doing today?
I'm just great. How about you, Matthew?
Pretty good, pretty good. All right, so we've all heard you playing a range of different colourful characters, but all of us here don't know too much yet about you. So I'd like to start off with the superhero origin story, so to speak. If you could tell us where you got started with acting and performance, the kind of things you were doing before Bethesda and Thief and all of the game stuff came along.
Well, I really started acting as a stage actor. And that was in my home area on the East Coast, in the New England area, and that I've done about 200 productions of one kind or another on stage, and that involves writing, directing, sound design. I've even done some set design, costume design. Sort of the only job I haven't done in theater over the years is lighting design. It's still a mystery to me. And then, sort of as a parallel career, for a while, I was doing voiceovers for the usual kinds of applications, narrations, and industrials, and a lot of commercials and things like that. And then one day in the late 1990s, I got a call from a casting agent in Boston asking me to audition for what was called a CD-ROM project at the time, and I went along to the audition, and the audition. The story that I often tell about this is that I thought the audition went really, really well. I got great feedback from the engineer who was running it, and I was used to this kind of schedule with my other voiceover work, that if you went in for an audition on a Tuesday and you hadn't heard anything by Friday, you can be pretty sure you didn't get the job. Right. 6 months later, Looking Glass calls me and asks me to come in to read for the first Thief game, and that was really my introduction to this world, beyond the usual applications that you get with a new computer, or you did get back in those days. Nanasar, I think, was one of them, and that sort of thing. So that's how I got started with Looking Glass, and that audition was for the first Thief game, and
back in when was that?
1997.
7. Okay, I was 3.
Yeah, in 97 I went to the audition. 98, I think it was released. So 20 years this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, coming back to it 6 months later with what you were used to, I imagine, did you even remember what it was you'd gone in for in the first place when it came out of nowhere?
I had to be reminded, and it had gone through a lot of changes since the audition, too. Garrett was originally supposed to be some sort of Scottish spy.
Right.
And I kind of did a Sean Connery for them, and thought that went really well. And by the time they ended up calling me in December, he had morphed into the character that we know now. And I did have to be reminded about what was this one all about, and when they told me that he wasn't a Scottish spy anymore, I kind of said, so what are we doing with this character then? And they said, I don't know, come in, show us what you got, which was really a wonderful introduction to the work that I did with Looking Glass. They were a remarkably open and creative team of people out there working in North Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Right. Well, that would have been.
And
sorry,
there was a.
Oh, we got a delay, maybe. I do get that sometimes on Skype. Yeah, apologies. No, I was going to say that would have been a very freeing experience, just having them say, I don't know, give us what you like, and then I guess he wound it up being not too far away from how you sound, obviously more heightened. But a lot of that game, from what I saw, there was a lot of narration there, so it wouldn't have been that far removed from what you'd been doing in a lot of your other voice work at the time, because it seemed like most of your Garrett lines, in the first one at least, were like at the beginning of missions, saying what the story sort of unfolded through your voice, and as opposed to scenes and such.
Yeah, it was a very comfortable fit, absolutely. And the voice that we eventually came up with is not too distant from my own. It's a bit more whispery and down there and that sort of thing. But it was lots of fun to do, and the audio department at Bethesda or at Looking Glass was just a great bunch of guys to work with. So lots of fun.
Yeah. Well, back then with games, I imagine it was a lot less. What's the word? Not rigid, but a lot less regimented, I suppose, in terms of the big, massive studios that we have today. Looking Glass, you would have been working, I suppose, with developers directly.
Yes, absolutely. And the studio was basically a kind of unused closet right off of the audio suite that they had. There were many times when I would go in there and they had to kind of shuffle around some dead computers just to make room for me to stand. But it was really a terrific experience, and that atmosphere of freedom continued through working on the other Thief games. And System Shock 2, where again they presented a character to me and we just kind of played. We tried out a number of different voices and came up with ones that we thought were interesting and fun, and really valued that freedom. Wonderful sense of humor too with everyone working there, and
that definitely helps. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's all too rare in this business that you get to crack wise.
Well, I was going to say that dark closet atmosphere would have suited Thief anyway, because the whole thing is slinking about in the shadows. If anything, the whole feel of that room would have helped. But I wanted to specifically ask in Thief 2. Now, Thief was before my time, but I was researching as I came up to this, and I was blown away. You also played the villain in Thief 2, Father Karras, I believe.
That's right.
The reason why I pointed out that Garrett's voice is not too far removed from you is, oh boy, Karras was quite far removed from you. To all the people listening to this who have no idea what I'm talking about, I highly advise, just not obviously you can't if you're live, but to go and look at some of Karras's lines of dialogue. I'm not going to do a pale imitation of it, but that voice was very unique to me.
I had a friend in high school named Ralph who invented this character called the Man with Too Many Fat Globules.
Okay.
And he loved doing this voice, and I got pretty fond of this character too. And we would just do it when we were fooling around. And actually coming up with the voice of Karras was a bit of a process, and I went back and forth with it with the folks at Looking Glass, and we and kind of in desperation, I did the Man with Too Many Fat Globules for them. And the response that I got was, wow, that's really interesting. What if he's the man with too many fat globules and anger management issues? And so that's how Karras was born. And you can hear the fat in his voice when he gets his cheeks puffed out like that. And the anger management comes through when he just can't carry things inside anymore. So that's a bit of Karras right there.
You can hear the facial expression, can't you, everybody? I imagine you have to kind of look like you're in pain.
A little bit, yeah.
That. It's beautiful.
It's not an easy one to sustain, that's for sure. It was doing too many fat globules with your friend in high school for 5 minutes at a time is one thing. Doing it over a 4-hour period and screaming at the same time is an interesting experience, to say the least.
Well, that's a good public service announcement for the kids out there today. Don't do too many fat globules with your friends at school. It'll mess your mind up. You'll turn into this man. You'll have funny voices. Well, actually, that's a plus. Do it if you like, but all right. But it fascinates me that we have a menacing, and he was like, he was, he has he's silly to listen to, but he was, a compelling villain that a lot of people, quite obviously the game was very well received, and yet he sounded like that. So to put all that together is just fantastic to me. I commend you.
Yeah, it was an interesting challenge, and to keep it, it does so border on the cartoonish, and people have even compared it to Droopy Dog, but he also had to have that edge to it, and that was really fun.
Well, I think the atmosphere and the mood made it such that you get past, I suppose, the silliness of the voice and see what lies beyond that, and if anything, that makes it creepier that he sounds the way he does. So,
yep,
it was a very good idea, I think. So, well done to them on that. All right, so we'll perhaps move on a bit to the main topic and start talking about Fallout, since I have a ridiculous pile ahead of me of questions to ask about this game. I am no doubt I'm going to have to skip a few. Your first job with Bethesda, I believe, was Fallout 3. Is that the first time you worked with them?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and you were pretty much you were every Mr. Handy in that game. Was that an audition like anything else back then? Were they looking for the voice that you did for that, I suppose, John Cleese kind of Basil Fawlty butler, or did it take a while for you to develop that one as well?
That one came pretty quickly, and I think the writing was very helpful in just pinpointing where we wanted to go with that character. And the Basil Fawlty analogy is very apt.
Yeah.
Once I saw the script, it became clear to me that was kind of what they were going for, and it's such a fun voice to do, and it was easy to kind of slide into that one as well. And my Bethesda contact really came through because of my work with Looking Glass. When Looking Glass Studios went under, some of the people who had been working there, among them Emil Pagliarulo, moved over to Bethesda. And this often happens when a game studio will have a bit of a run and then will fold, and the people will go on to work for other studios, and thankfully they take their contact lists with them when they go. So they called me about that project, and I was certainly happy to hear from them. And there was, because the Fallout universe existed prior to Fallout 3, there were some voices in there that we had to go back to earlier games for references on, but I was able to kind of create the Mr. Handys on my own without having to reach back to the other iterations.
I believe they were in the earlier games, but only because back in those days, I think only the very major characters got voiced lines, so the robots would have just been yours to create. It's interesting, because I did see just over the internet people saying, the developers wanted a Basil Fawlty, so or something like that. So I'm glad to hear that. Not semi-confirmed. But yeah, had you done anything like that before? And by that I mean you played a whole host of characters who were effectively the same character in different situations. They all had the same identical voice. I suppose some of them were a little more unhinged than others. And how you, both in 3 and 4, I suppose, we're not on Codsworth yet, but just on the various, the sea of Mr. Handys, the rank and file.
Lost you, Matthew.
Sorry?
Sorry, we had a bit of a glitch there, and I missed a little bit of that question.
That's all right. I'll go back. I'm just talking about playing a whole host of characters with the same voice and the same personality. Did you did they all just kind of blend into one, or did you try to distinguish? Oh, now I'm a different one. Now it's how did that go?
Well, again, the direction is key in the writing. Also, there's a the scripts that I'm given, it's very clear that there are differences. And one of the fun challenges about doing all those Mr. Handies is keeping them within a certain range, within a certain character choice, but they're also different moods, different aspects of that character that you heighten for one and pull back on for another, and so there's and it's I really have to give a lot of credit to the writing in everything that I've done with Bethesda. It's just so sharp and so specific, and it's very rare that I'm handed a script and I'm left wondering about anything. It's usually, and that's a really particular kind of skill that as a writer myself, I'm kind of in awe of the folks who create these scripts and are able in fairly short, concise little lines to give you such depth of character. It's really kind of remarkable.
As a writer, when you come across scripts that, let's say, and naming no names or anything, of course, obviously not, but if you come across something where you think, oh, this could be tightened, but your job is just to act, like, do you have to hold that back, that impulse? And just do the work?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. My job at that time, they didn't hire me to write; they hired me to act, and so I'm there to voice it. If there's something grammatically incorrect, or there's just a problem with syntax, or a problem with just how a line flows, it's just rhythmically awkward, I might make a suggestion that can we try this? Can we do? What if we could change that word? I wonder, would that be possible? But you do that very carefully, because that's not what you're there for. And often there are times when I'll read a line for the first time, and usually I'm seeing a script for the first time when I walk into a studio. So almost every read is a cold read, where I don't get the intent right away, and something that I'll think is perhaps not quite right, once I've actually voiced it, I go, oh yeah, that's what that meant, and that's a good lesson for me too.
Yeah, I imagine it's good to like not necessarily hide how you're interpreting something in those situations, but I guess at the end of the day, it's just all a matter of being diplomatic, being careful and polite, and making sure that, above all else, whenever there's a disagreement or any kind of confusion, that, you know, the respect is there for all parties. Yeah, that's
And I have to say that, especially with Bethesda, it's very rare, very, very rare that I see a line that I have any kind of question about, or an issue like we're talking about. The writing is generally so good.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I think you were especially blessed too, because they seem to just knock it out of the park with the Mr. Handies. I don't know if it's just the fantastic personality that he has, but no matter which one you're talking to, it's always gold.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot overstate that.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many times, again, because I'm often reading these things for the first time, that I get halfway through a line and I just crack up, because the humor embedded in it is so wonderful. And engineers and I have learned that we need to allow a little time to just have a laugh every now and again.
Oh yeah, definitely got to have that processing time, because that just speaks to the strength of it. If you can get people when they're in the booth before the game's even been made, then you know it's going to be a hit when it comes out. All right, so. In Fallout 4, we of course got CODSWORTH, who had a lot more development and spotlight than all the handies before him. So, in what ways did you approach CODSWORTH differently to the one to the rank and file handies, so to speak? What sets CODSWORTH apart in your mind?
Well, his history with the family is key to that, and that he has a great loyalty and a great affection for the family, and their quest, their mission is his as well. Is one of the things that makes that character so interesting, and so interesting as a companion too. He's fiercely loyal, and the fun thing about him is that he's not without opinions and judgments, clearly, and yet at the end of the day, he knows his place in the world too. So that's a fun challenge.
Yeah, the opinions are definitely a thing. For myself, I suffer that gamer compulsion of picking up every random item you see. And I like that they wrote... Well, most of the companions will react to that, but I spent a fair amount of time with Codsworth in the early game, and more than anything else, it was stinging coming from him, just that, oh, surely you're not going to pick that up, are you? And I was like, will you stop judging me? Oh, yeah. We had our disagreements, but we mostly got along well.
Yeah, he can be a bit fussy, can't he? Yeah.
He killed me once. I'm not kidding. I believe it was a bug. He's not supposed to kill you, but he doesn't like it when you steal, and he doesn't like it when you pick a lock. Yes, he doesn't like it when you pick a lock that belongs to someone else, but...
No, it simply isn't done.
I know. Oh, God, flashbacks. But nonetheless, he's not supposed to attack you over it. He's supposed to just snark. But
every now and again, things get a little bit out of hand, and I might forget myself every now and again, I suppose. I suppose it's possible.
Do. Yes. And because I downloaded a small modification to the game that makes the companions a bit more aggressive, because that was entertaining to me. And what it did to Codsworth was that it meant that he set things on fire all the time. Just everything was ablaze. We had ourselves a pyromaniacal robotic menace. It became a running joke on the stream that Codsworth was... When he snapped during those 200 years, he'd actually just turned into the trash can man. He was totally off the rails. And he burned me to death on a ship, on a wooden ship, which wasn't very smart.
It's a wonder he doesn't set everything on fire. I mean, he goes around with flames shooting out of his butt all the time.
Exactly. Well, now that we think of it that way, but no, it would be we'd be like the joke would be we'd be talking to someone in a major in a major settlement in Diamond City or something, and I'd basically say I'd have Codsworth off to the side and be like, shall we set them on fire, sir? No, Codsworth, they're friends. We do that to enemies, not friends. But I like setting things on fire. No! It was...
Great fun.
Yeah, and that's, again, the strength of a Bethesda game to me is the character came so much to life that you sort of start to tell your own stories with them as well, and that was mine. But yeah, so Codsworth, of course, had some tremendous lines, as we've been saying, but some of the other ones, of course, have some incredible stuff as well. I think my favorite from Fallout 4, I'm curious as to whether remember this one in particular, Deezer's Lemonade, who no matter what you would ask him, he would just offer you lemonade.
Right.
And I think Codsworth has an interaction with him where he tries to get Deezer to have a proper conversation, but Deezer isn't programmed as well. Do you recall those situations where handies have to talk to one another? How did you do those?
Well, they're all recorded separately, and it's kind of fun to. It might not even have been the same session, because sessions can go over. Usually, we were recording on 4. I think we would do like 3 days at a time, and then come back a couple of months later and do another 3 or 4 days, and. Sometimes the conversations were separated by huge gaps of time. But I do remember that exchange, and I do remember that it was one of those times when I was just laughing in the studio again. The lemonade scene is particularly wonderful.
Yeah, it's especially good. I don't know if since you would have recorded things in chunks, I imagine there'd be plenty of things you wouldn't, but the town that he's in, if the mission with them goes a certain way, they all try to kill you, and so you have to wipe out the entire town. But Deezer just sits there and continues to offer you lemonade while you're slaughtering everybody. It's beautiful. Anyway, also we had one that was a little different. Whitechapel Charlie, the bartender.
Oh,
who
right,
was...
yeah, Whitechapel Charlie. Oh, yeah, I remember him. Yeah.
Yeah, hacked and modified. So was that accent one that you were able to just fall into, or is that one you had to work on a bit?
Oh, yeah, no, that's something that I've got. He's a bit of uh, who is he? He's a bit of Michael Caine, I suppose, but early Michael Caine. And someone else I was referencing at the time who I can't think of at the moment, but he was great fun to do too. Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, a bit of a smaller role there, but one that just blows you away when you walk in, because you expect, of course, the regular Mr. Handy, and then you get that. So
Yeah.
let's talk about accents for a bit, because that's a topic that interests me a bit. Are they just in general a strength of yours, or do you have? Is it more? Do you have to work on it? Like, when did you start doing accents, and how are you so good at them, sir?
Well, I can't remember a time when I wasn't doing accents. I've always been fascinated by them, and the concept that how in such a small geographic region an accent can shift so dramatically.
Oh, yeah.
And I really, I've mentioned this in a couple of other interviews. I think this actually goes back to my parents bringing home the original Broadway cast recording of My Fair Lady, and listening to that and getting this notion that Higgins says in the play that he can tell within several blocks where someone is from, and that just fascinated me. So
Yeah.
from an early age, I really started listening to how people talk, the differences in the rhythm, the differences in the melody, and of course the difference in vowel sounds and word choices and idioms and things like that. And I was kind of fortunate to grow up in an area of Western Pennsylvania that has a very unusual dialect of its own that you don't hear outside of this somewhat small geographic region. And then we would spend summers in Western New York State, and that part of the United States is much more aligned with a kind of Great Lakes region, for want of a better description of it. It's much more like the accent that you think of in Chicago or Cleveland or Minnesota, like that. Those kind of vowels like that. I found a fox the other day and I put it in a box.
So basically, you can geographically track the evolution.
So it was
of
absolutely,
yeah.
And it was such an extreme difference from what I was used to in my hometown that I thought, wow, here's an example of exactly what they're talking about in this play. And the more I would travel, the more I would try to listen and pick up things, and whatever I would watch on television or in movies or whatever. I was always tracking the accent, and it's something that I find fascinating. I did a lot of work for a number of years with an Irish company,
Okay.
and I was basically the only American working with this group. And there were people from all over Ireland, and it was fascinating to me. I think we tend, in the United States anyway, to think of an Irish accent, and to just discover how many different regional variations there are on that accent, and to hear Irish people doing each other's accent, and kind of taking the piss out of this guy from his Cork with his Cork accent, or the Dublin accent, or Belfast, and it's a small country, but there is all this variation within, which is fascinating to me. How did that develop, and where does it go away, and where are those borders, and when you cross over, is there something about the topographical features that influences that? Is it the cultural heritage? And the answer is yes to all of those. They all go into making up those wonderful things. I always get amused when people say, well, I really don't have an accent.
Yeah.
course you have an accent. Everybody has
That
an
seems to
accent.
be an American thing. I've seen a lot of Americans say no accent. I guess it's an arrogance in a way.
Boy,
But
is it ever. You're
yeah,
absolutely right about that, Matthew. Or just a lack of self-awareness
mm,
that is kind of shocking in a way.
yeah,
We tend to be guilty of that sometimes over here, don't we?
a little, yeah. Uh, so if you had to specifically learn a new accent for a role, how would you go about doing that? Like, and would you, or how much studying would you do before you felt comfortable in doing it justice?
Well, there are people who will do this completely phonetically. I mean,
Mm,
there are books that you can get that have a phonetic uh, description of an accent. To me, they're absolutely useless because I just never learned that way. I'm entirely ear. I have to have people to
yeah.
model on. So I just try to find as many original source recordings as possible. There's a pretty good website out of I think it's the University of Kansas that is a good kind of starting place for picking up new accents. They're unfortunately they ask people to read the same. It's about a two-paragraph story
Right.
for each of these examples, and what I find a little bit uh, of a false lead about that is that I think when you ask someone to read something, they become much more self-conscious. So they try to improve their accent or try to think of what their version of improving their accent might be,
Right.
ironing it out. Often at the end of that interview, they'll go on to just have a kind of normal conversation with the person, and that's where you really get to hear what they sound like in real life.
Yeah, I can see that. When asked to read something, your priority stops being whatever the accent would have been. It would be making yourself clear. That's
Yes.
the bait.
Yep.
That's the absolute impulse there. So that's a bit self defeating, I suppose.
Yeah.
Better to watch an interview with someone who speaks that way naturally than narration by them. Oh, I get that. Okay, so we've been talking about Codsworth and Mr. Handy's, which we can't do without bringing up the names. One of the big talking points when the game came out. That was the main news article to me when the game came out. Was the butler says your name, and that was everyone was so excited about that. So you. For anyone who doesn't know, which would be no one, but let's explain anyway. When Codsworth was programmed to say your name, and he could say just about 1,000 of them, I'd say a good 95% of those would have been common names. Some of them were pop culture references, which I think dates Fallout 4 in a way, because you had the Mad Max ones, and a lot were to do with stuff that had been right on that year. Some were fun and silly, some were rude. But if you named your character that right way, then instead of just Sir or Madam, that'd play the line with the name, and you recorded every single one of them with the same enthusiasm. I can't imagine that was easy.
It was an interesting challenge, that's for sure. They were kind enough. Mark Lampert was engineering most of those sessions, and he's the audio director at Bethesda. And he wisely limited them to an hour at the end of each 4-hour session. So it
Yes.
wasn't as if I had to do all. I think it ended up being something like 1,300 ultimately that we recorded. But it was spread out over many days, and the challenge was, as you say, keeping that enthusiasm in there, because
Right.
you want every player to feel like this is the only name that was ever chosen. And so the difficulty was not falling into a rhythm with it where it just became repetitive, and that was what I was most trying to avoid, and I think successfully we managed to do that.
Yeah. I'll share what the live chat is talking about right now. They're saying, Solar read in the chat saying, when that happened in her household, everybody just absolutely lost it, and they started just about 8 new games just to hear if Codsworth would say their name. And so I'm just picturing the ones with the more the more common names being all yay, and then someone would with a less common name would come oh. I suppose you couldn't get to everybody, which would take you. You'd still be doing it right now if you were getting to every name anyone's ever had. But I'm loving just how much effort they put into something that, for each one of them, I guess 0.1% of the players would have heard. That's whose idea was that? Do you know, and how it all came about?
That's a really good question, and I wish I knew the answer to that. I should find that out, because it is a brilliant idea, and it really speaks to how much Bethesda really cares about the fans.
Yes.
And wants each experience to be meaningful to everyone who picks up the game. And I find that over and over again working with them. There's a lot of care, a lot of affection for their audience, and that means a lot to me.
Yeah, and everyone that plays their games gets to feel like they matter because the game talks to them, whether your name's
That's right.
Matthew or Mark or Roberta or Furiosa or Boobies.
Yes.
I don't know how you
Indeed.
did that one with a straight face, or the sweary ones.
Yeah, that was another one where the engineer and I both kind of lost it at the same time, I think.
Yeah. Okay, we've got about, I'll try to get 10 minutes of Nick, and then we'll go into, what's the, oh God, the chat just reminded me of one, Orgasmo.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
It's an Orgasmo.
I am keeping that. I am keeping that. All right, so they gave you another role in Fallout 4 that, listening to you and just the general way you carry yourself, I am feeling more and more like Nick Valentine was in a way tailor-made for you. If you said you worked with and know the writer, maybe that was the case. You got to play Humphrey Bogart style noir detective right out of the 40s, except that he's made out of computer circuits.
Mm-hmm.
How did you approach that when they handed it to you?
Let me add it. That was my approach. I just was so excited about this idea. I think I have seen every Humphrey Bogart movie ever made, including some really, really bad ones. He was a Warner Brothers contract player, and there were times when there's a famous story about, I think it's the movie Dr. X or something like that, which was a really, really terrible film. And he just stormed into Jack Warner's office and said, "No more. I'm not doing this anymore. Get me out of this." He was he was a big inspiration to me, but I also love all that classic detective noir stuff. I mean, I'm a big fan too of the Robert Mitchum, Philip Marlowe movies, Farewell, My Lovely, and the other one, the name of which I'm blanking on right now. So it was a real labor of love to get into that. But the thing that made Nick so enjoyable was just his humanity, his heart. He is the most soulful character of any I think I've ever played, which is intentionally ironic because he's a synth. And that just was a great challenge, and I loved all those sessions. And we had kind of an inkling that things were working out after the first round of recording for Nick, and Mark Lampert came back to me and he said the buzz around the office at Bethesda was really good about this character, and they were predicting that he was going to become a fan favorite, and indeed that happened.
Oh, yeah.
So that was very, very gratifying.
I'm glad that they worked him into the main story in a way that a lot of those... technically, both of your companions were closer to the... every player was walked straight into the path of those two, whereas a lot of those other companions you had to go looking for. So, yeah, right. It's I can see Bethesda putting its best right in the spotlight, so to speak. So when you recorded for Nick, I'm just curious, because you would have known the Mr. Handys by this point, but did you know what Nick was going to look like? Did you have the visual material that would end up being in the game? Like, what sort of stuff do you have to work with in that booth?
Usually just the script.
Yeah.
And I honestly can't remember, Matthew, whether I saw concept art for Nick before any recording was done or not. But once I did finally see it, it was so right.
Yeah.
It was such a good match for the dialogue I'd been given. Yeah, that's it. That's him. That's our guy. Yeah. So it was a great opportunity, and I would love it if someday Nick were to come back in something. That would be more fun than I can say.
Well, you never know. Bethesda's got a lot of work ahead of them. So one of the things about recording for a game like that, especially a companion character with tons of conversations with the player, you'd have a lot of reactive dialogue, a lot of, well, reacting to the fact that at pretty much any time we can pick from 4 different things to say, and you would likely have a different response to each case. So when recording exchanges like that, you don't really get to do the scene the way you would do it in animation or in theater or something. It would be is it a bit more erratic, having to I guess change your emotions on the fly, like, oh, in this path he's angry at you, and in this path he's really excited. Was that tough to do? How exactly does that go down?
It can be very erratic. It can be often I'll be given a chunk of following a certain series of choices where it's a kind of emotional response over 4 or 5 lines, and then we'll switch to a different emotional response and do the scene again, basically, with that additional with the other response. But sometimes it's a matter of switching from one line to the next. It's jumping all over the place, and that's actually one of the biggest challenges of this work, is that you have to be able to kind of turn on a dime. And I also am very fortunate to have worked with some really, really great directors in my time working at Bethesda. Mark Lampert, the audio director, being one of them, Wes Gleason, another one, and Cal, who directed a lot of the stuff on Fallout 4, was another one who's just really terrific. And a good director has to have such a thorough knowledge of the game going into a session that I'm always astounded when they'll be able to give me a very detailed context of why I'm saying this line this way this time as opposed to the previous take. So it's a real skill too that I think can't be overestimated.
I think on the surface, people who play a game don't really get to see how important the director is to all that, because quite often you'll see a game where the majority of the performances feel just a little flat and a little off, and it's easy to say, oh, they hired bad actors. No, they didn't. It would have been a case where the direction just wasn't quite fitting the tone of the game, and whatever was happening in that booth was disconnected with what was happening outside of it in the development. So it's always one of the key aspects you need to make that game sing, is to have a director who knows exactly the picture and can communicate that to the actors.
You're absolutely correct about that. Yeah. It's well said.
All right, so moving on from Fallout main game, we get into Far Harbor, the first DLC, which is a big step forward to Nick. We got to see his origins and finally explain the story of him, since before then he didn't really fit with what else we saw of the synths. And we meet Dima, who is his, I suppose, brother of sorts, and your other major character. Mm-hmm. Now, where Nick is incredibly human down to the bones, to the point where you just forget he's a synth after a while, even though you can see the big hole in his neck, Dima is a lot more machine, a lot more alien. How did you go about creating his voice, and what were the influences on that?
We had a lot of back and forth on that one, and I think it was an interesting process process. I remember sending files back and forth to Bethesda for about a week. No, try tweaking it this way. Try going this way. Try a little lower. Try a little slower cadence. And ultimately, we kind of ended up pretty close to the first choice with some interesting modifications. And the more dialogue that I saw, the more of the script that was shown to me, the more I came to appreciate how complex a problem that was.
Right.
Because he needed to have a kind of similar emotional range to Nick, but as a prototype, as an earlier version, as an unfinished Nick in a way. There were things that there were colors that we had to leave out. He's in pale shades in each of those emotional responses, but they're there anyway. So that was a really fun challenge.
It's like he's detached in a way. His emotions are all there and they're under the surface, but on the face of it, because his development, where Nick got a kind of human personality brain to work with when he was made, Dima was left to develop naturally, and so as a computer, he doesn't talk like we do, but he does feel kind of like we do. So I almost got sort of at first I got a kind of HAL 9000 vibe to him, just the way he spoke and the sort of quiet menace almost. The real twist to me with Dima was that he didn't turn out to be a villain. I think the first time I played, the whole idea was, oh, he's so creepy. Oh, there's got to be something. He's got to be faking it. No.
No, his story is really a remarkably sad one,
yes.
And again, that's a kind of character choice, an example of Bethesda's writing that they're willing to go places in their games that I think a lot of games just don't even bother with, and I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, I loved the moral decision of Far Harbor when you uncover the ruthless things that he did, and the decision you can make is one of, I don't approve of what you did before, but for the greater good, we've got to go along with it. And I think that ends up being the best, I say with air quotes, outcome for all of the citizens of the various groups. But it leaves you feeling awkward, because, that's the decision that a calculating computer could have made, and had to make. But he convinces you, or he convinced me. So, it's a very powerful story. One of my favorite narrative twists and turns was in that particular DLC. All right, so we're coming up on our last 10 minutes here, so I think I'll pass things.
That went fast.
It does. It does. No, I do this for 4 hours a night sometimes, and it feels like 20 minutes. But yeah, it goes. So we'll start to open the floor to... I've got a list of questions people sent me earlier that I'll find some out, but I've also... Anyone in the chat who has something they would like to ask, now is the time to send it. I can't promise I'll be able to get to everything, but we had someone, and I don't know why they want to know this. I do not know why they want to know this, but they are adamant, desperate, constantly, again and again. They want me to ask you what your favorite Mexican food is.
What my favorite Mexican food is?
Yeah. I have, I wash my hands of that. I don't understand it, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to ask.
Boy, that would be a tough one, because I love Mexican food.
Well, that's good.
And I spend a lot of time in Mexico. Wow. Gosh, I don't know. Oh yeah, I do. There is a place that I go to sometimes that makes an incredible vegetarian jicama taco. Instead of a corn shell, the shell is actually made out of a slice of jicama, and it is just delicious. So I'm going to go with that, paired with a nice margarita then you got yourself a meal there, pal.
Oh, very good. All right. So Ash in the chat wants to know whether you play any of the games you're in or take a look at the finished product. What you do once it's all said and done. Do you go back to it?
Yeah, of course. And I don't play as much as I'd like to, and that's just a matter of kind of lack of time. But it's always interesting to revisit it, and there are always surprises too. Oh, that's what was going on when I said that.
Yes.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay. Yeah.
I find there are two types of people in acting. Like I'm. Of the actors that I know, there are the ones who love to go back to things they've worked on, like to watch back their thing, as to look themselves in the eye and improve, or to just to enjoy the product. And then there are the ones who just cannot stand to and will run away, because not out of cowardice as such, but more, I think for some it's the perfectionist in your brain wants to go back and change what you see. And
well, the interesting thing about about having a background that's mostly as a stage actor, one of the things I love about the freedom of being on stage is that once I enter this world and completely inhabit a character, and I can imagine I look like anything.
Yeah.
And then when I go out and do film work and I have to see myself as that character, I go, oh man, no, that's not it. So that's I guess I fall down more in the second category. I'm always more about the work ahead. I'm always kind of interested in the challenge coming up rather than going back and reliving my greatest hits.
Well, so what you said about looking back at yourself on film, games and voice work would be a great escape for that, because you see the character they created, and your realization of that with animation, you can be anything, you can look like anything. It's one of the freeing parts of voiceover.
It is. Yep.
Yeah. So that's pretty good. Someone else. Wow. Apparently we're on food. Someone else asked hot dogs or hamburgers.
Neither. I'm a vegetarian.
I thought I remember that. I don't know why I knew that, but I saw that somewhere and I thought, I bet she's getting a no here. No, that's fair. What kind of hobbies do you do in your spare time apart from acting and performance?
I play music. I read a lot. Some of my other work involves a lot of reading, and write, and spend time with my family.
So it's all got to do with stories, isn't it?
Absolutely. You hit it. Yeah. You hit it exactly, Matthew. That's the through line of my life, and everything revolves around stories. And
I'm exactly the same way. That's how I picked that up. Yeah.
Yeah.
The telling of them, you said?
The telling of them, and the fact that as an actor you get to become part of a story too, that's the real attraction for me. I just have always loved that aspect of becoming part of a different world, becoming someone who is, it really takes you outside of yourself. Yeah. But I find reading does that too. So,
absolutely. Well, I think we're very, very lucky in this day and age to have the new mediums spring up. I find I tend to do things I'll watch a lot for a while. I'll watch a lot of TV or movies, and then I'll stop that, and I'll be reading books for a few months. Or nowadays I play games pretty much constantly because I have the stream that I do, which the game is the vessel for that. But It used to be that was on its rotation as well, because each medium, it satisfies it in a different way, and having that variety just makes it all more, what's the word? All just more fresh. By the time you get back to that first thing, I find that it's, I've been craving it by the time I get there, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Again, well said.
Yeah. Okay, what else have we got in here? Oh, I'll ask this, but Everyone I've asked a question like this to, they've always struggled. Of the characters you've played, what's your favorite? Everyone hates that question.
Uh, yeah, I can't say that I hate it. It's just a difficult question
Mm,
because I think I've really been very fortunate in that I've been given the opportunity to voice so many wonderful characters, whether it's
yeah,
Corvo or Garrett or the everybody I've done for Bethesda. So it's an embarrassment of riches, and it's like choosing your favorite child. I think Garrett will always have a soft spot in my heart because
yes,
just because he was the first, he was my introduction to this whole field, and again, a very complicated character with a lot of uh, subsurface emotions that were fun to explore. So,
yeah.
yeah, if I had to choose one, I guess he'd be the one.
If you were raked under the coals, you'd be Garrett.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, that makes sense. In a lot of cases, you always go back to that first experience, and it's good that you had such a deep, brilliant experience to start you off in that. Because imagine if you had had a rotten one, and how you would have felt about video games at that if that had happened.
yeah,
Yeah,
would have been different.
So I have a question that I ask. Um, that I ask anyone I ever interview. Which the people watching live might be confused. I used to do a podcast where I'd interview other actors, but it wasn't live. So this is my first live one. You get to be my first. But I have a question on accents, which is, as we talked about before, have you ever done, because I'm Aussie, have you ever done an Australian, and how good is your Australian accent?
I don't think it's very good because I haven't worked on it. I don't think the only project I've ever done that had an Australian background was a production of the play Our Country's Good, which is set in Australia in the early penal colony years.
Mm.
It's a fascinating play, but everybody in it is English. They've just come over. So it was we were basically going for regional dialects in the UK.
Right.
So I'm sure I could get there. It wouldn't take a little time, so I'm not even going to attempt it now. But I love listening to Australian accents, and I'm sure there's a tremendous variety in Australian accents, right?
Yeah. Every but I wouldn't call myself an expert on it, but there is everywhere. You know, there'd be a more Western Australian sound. I sound different from people who aren't too far from me, because I spent a hell of a lot of time when I was growing up with Irish grandparents who had very thick accents, and so
Where were they from in Ireland?
Northern Ireland. They were from Derry. So
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. Huh.
yeah, and so
Interesting.
I heard that as often as I heard an Aussie accent, and so like it's not you don't hear it in me, but for myself, oh, there's one, the fur. I don't say for. There's the slight inflection here and there because my mother, and she was born and raised in Australia, but it was just part of the family that we'd mimic their accents for fun. We all did it. We all just did. That was us. It annoyed the hell out of them.
Yeah. Well, and those are the other things that we were talking earlier about the various things that influence dialect, that influence accent. It's family connections, having those people in your background and those little vowel sounds, those little traces that seep in that you're not even aware of that might have nothing at all to do with the region you're from.
Absolutely. There's a disgruntled gentleman from New Zealand in my chat who I think is
I'll
jealous.
see if I can gruntle him.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. No, he's wanting to know if you like Australians or New Zealanders more.
Wow, boy, that's he's a not only disgruntled, he's a provocateur.
I know.
Uh,
He wants us to
I
get into a fight right now.
I think they're equally wonderful people.
You know, so do I. So do I. That's exactly the answer I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
I'm just shaking my head a little. Okay. That's all right. Okay, well, thanks very much for joining me. I do have one request that carries on from my stories of the pyromaniacal Codsworth, because there isn't any line in the game of Codsworth gleefully asking his master if he could go set those people over there on fire. And I just want to hear it once. Would you be so kind?
Mr. Matthews, would you mind if I went over there and set those people on fire? They don't appear to be doing anything useful at the moment.
Okay, so I think I can die happy. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Stephen. And thanks for lending your time to all of us tonight, this morning, and whatever time of day it is for the person sitting here watching this. I look forward to hearing you in all sorts of things to come from Bethesda and other places. And I am eternally grateful and amazed that you stopped by today. Thanks so much.
Oh, Matthew, thank you. And just a shout out to all the fans about Underworld Ascendant 2, which will be coming out later this year. It's a game that I've been working on for a couple of years, and I'm really excited about this. It's being developed by some of the ex-Looking Glass people, Paul Neurath among them. And I think it's going to be a terrific addition to the Underworld canon. So watch for that one.
Fantastic. If you want to follow Stephen and what he's up to, you can find his Twitter at Stephen the Voice, I believe. That's Stephen with a PH. And your website is... Remind me.
My website is shockingly out of date at the moment, as I realized this morning. But
so shall I not?
You can go there, but you won't find much of interest at the moment.
Right.
It's StephenRussellVoice.com.
Okay. That's good. All right. Well, that about wraps us up. I'll let you get along with the rest of your Thursday.
And if anybody in Australia knows anybody who runs a convention, I'd love to come down and do an appearance down there sometime. That would be so much fun.
Absolutely. Especially in Melbourne. Then I'd get to shake your hand.
Yes.
That would be beautiful.
Let's make it happen.
All right. All the Melbourne people in the chat now, let's all email them at once. No, I'm not kidding. Let's make this a campaign. I am absolutely 100% behind this, and I'm glad you brought it up. I will continue to shout loudly about that and see what happens, my friend. All right.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And yeah, until next time, if there is a next time, hopefully in a few years you'll do more stuff and I'll bother you again and we'll do another of these.
Please, anytime, Matthew. It's a great pleasure.
Fantastic. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.